welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. This is Dr. Greer, and we're on the World Puja Network, and I'm joined today by Linda Willitts, who's worked with us for many years, since 1996, on the CSETI and disclosure projects. And we're going to be talking today about some of the exciting events that have happened over the years in the United Kingdom, in the areas around Stonehenge and Avebury and Silbury Hill, in this very mysterious part of the world. And Linda has been with me on a number of those expeditions, so we're sort of going to review the contact experiences that have happened and how they relate to the very strange crop circles that have been reported over the years. So, again, thanks to the World Puja Network for hosting us, and I think people find this discussion very, very interesting. First, I'd like to say that I first started going to England in 1992. I had met Colin Andrews, who coined the term crop circles, in 1991, and he and I had decided that it'd be very important, given the early contact events at the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, CSETI.org, has been having, that we should go to England to investigate if, in fact, there was an extraterrestrial connection to the crop circles, and if indeed they were under some kind of conscious manifestation as opposed to some natural phenomenon. He had already concluded in the late 1980s, I think in 1989, that in fact they were not man-made, at least not all of them, and that there was some intelligence behind them that was really quite profound. And so Colin Andrews, who had done some magnificent research and continues to do magnificent research in the area, inspired us to go over there and do an expedition. So we went over in 1992 to the area around in Wiltshire, the county of Wiltshire in England, which is kind of west-southwest of London, I believe, and it's very famous for having some of the ancient monolithic sites such as Stonehenge and Avebury, Silbury Hill, and a number of other remarkable ancient areas. And we were in an area right near Alton Barnes, which was the location of some of the most spectacular crop circle formations of 1991 and 92. And so we were on a farm in 1992 at Alton Barnes, and it's actually the same one we're going to be using this year. We're going over there with a research group, and it's about an 1,800-acre estate that has wheat and other crops grown on it, and it's in an area where Woodborough Hill, if you get on a map, you'll see that there's a site called Woodborough Hill that's sort of surrounded by this huge 1,800-acre farm. And so we went there with a relatively small group of people, and on one of the nights we decided that to do an experiment in consciousness, and this will be something that I think World Puja Network listeners will be interested in, because it's all about higher states of consciousness when you start talking about pujas and the Vedas. And so we went to up on Woodborough Hill and decided once we arrived on site that we would contact the extraterrestrial civilizations that we felt were behind the authentic crop circles that were appearing, and transmit to them a specific form. And the form that we ended up projecting is now the CSETI logo. If you get on the CSETI.org site, you'll see a whole report on this, by the way. And it is three circles made into an equilateral triangle connected by lines between the circles. And that was what we had decided we would send to the ETs using remote viewing and higher states of consciousness by connecting to the extraterrestrial civilizations and the spacecraft that had been seen in the area, and ask them if they would please make exactly that form in a crop circle, in a field, while we were there. And we did our protocols where we sat in a circle together and did a meditation using the mantras and using the remote viewing techniques that we've developed. And we then connected to the ETs and showed them this perfect equilateral triangle consisting of 3 circles connected by lines. And then we continued to do a number of other contact protocols, and we saw a number of ET craft very fast moving across the area, which we later found had in fact been filmed by people who were on some of the hillsides around us. In Golden Ball Hill, there was an object seen, and a number of other sites. Well, Sherry Adamek, who at that time was working very closely with me and had gotten involved in 1991 in the project, and I were a couple of days later ran into a gentleman who had been an intelligence agent with the government of England, and who had retired but had a strong interest in what was going on with this phenomenon. And we ran into this gentleman, and he had been keeping a logbook, and he had just come from a new crop circle, and he had opened his book, and he had a drawing of it, and it was precisely the form that we had projected mentally to the ETs and asked them to make a crop circle in that form, what is now the CSETI triangle. And when Sherry and I looked at it, we virtually burst into tears. We could not believe what we were seeing. And we asked this man, I believe his name was Ralph Noyes, and I said, where is this? And he says, well, it's over at Oliver's Castle. And, of course, I was visualizing a big old British castle. And Oliver's Castle, as it turns out, is actually a cliff. And it's a geological formation, and at the base of which is a farm. And it was not far at all from where we had been doing our contact work the night that we sent this shape out to the ETs. And so Sherry and I raced over there at 100 miles per hour, I mean literally, and climbed up onto this, drove up and walked out to the edge of this cliff where we could look down onto this farm. And there in the field was precisely and exactly the shape that the 12 of us or so who were up on Woodborough Hill that night had projected up to the ETs, the crop circle makers. And it was in a field that was not at all far from where we had been doing this work. Now, no one else in England or in the world knew that this is what we had projected, and it appeared the very night, the wee hours of the morning, that we had done the CE5 where we asked the ETs to make this form. So no one knew about it. It wasn't like this was advertised or public. In fact, we didn't even decide on what this form and shape would be until we got out there very late that night. And the farmer found that in the wee hours of the morning, maybe at 4 or 5 in the morning, because he was trying to harvest some of his field during some dry weather, and there it was. And it was as if it had been lifted from our consciousness and our mind and placed in the field. Well, this is when we realized, my God, this is a truly interactive phenomenon where there is a connection between the ETs that are involved in this mysterious crop circle phenomenon and human consciousness, if you understand the science of consciousness. So that was how all of that started. It was a very, very exciting. Now, on that same expedition in 92, a couple of days later, it had been really terrible weather. In the evening, suddenly a rainstorm came up on us, and we were in a field at the base of Woodborough Hill at this point where there was a crop circle that had appeared about the time that we landed in England on this particular year, 92. And a lot of people felt it was a very strange kind of storm because as we were sitting in the field, we noticed that from above there were these lights circling counterclockwise on the clouds, swirling counterclockwise, but not from below, like you'd have a searchlight, but from above, because there was no source from the ground. And you could see they were coming from above, shining down in the cloud, and they were swirling around counterclockwise. And we all saw this. And a few moments later, it just rained cats and dogs, unbelievable, right over this farm. So Colin Andrews, who had been out there, he left, as did a whole lot of other people. And it just poured so hard. Now, what Colin Andrews told us is that as he left, as soon as he touched the road and went off of the farm, there was no rain. So there was, I believe, an extraterrestrially created rainstorm right over this 1,800-acre estate. And the reason for it was because when word of that crop circle that looked like that is the CSETI triangle logo leaked out, we started having a lot of people spying on what we were doing. And the ETs were, I think, concerned about this for some reason. I mean, there may have been some elements that were there. And so this rainstorm caused everyone to think, oh, well, there's nothing going to happen tonight. And everybody went home. Well, myself and about 3 other people stayed out there in the pouring rain. We got back in our vehicles, and there was a little road in this farm that was actually paved, concrete, but it was like a 1-lane farm road in the center of this 1,800-acre estate, and had a little pull-out, and there were 2 cars that were remained, my car and then another gentleman's car, Chris Mansell. And we pulled out there. We decided to sit in the cars on the edge of this field and just wait for the worst of this to get over, because it was getting cold and wet. But my intuition, I was being told repeatedly, later, that something would happen later. So we didn't leave. And so we remained there. I will remark that as Colin Andrews was leaving, we saw a red orb appear at the back of his car, as if it was following him out. Now, interestingly, after a while, it was probably after midnight. I have to look at my notes. And suddenly there was a banging on my window of the car, and it was Chris Mansell, and he'd come out and he'd said, so I rolled the window down. This was a car that didn't have electric windows, so I had to get the old hand crank, and you never see these in cars anymore, except maybe in Europe. But so I cranked it down, and he was there saying, he says, there's a spacecraft in the field lit up like a bloody Christmas tree. And, of course, he was a big jokester, and I just chuckled, and I said, yeah, and I'm Santa Claus. And he says, no, it's here. And he stepped aside, and I looked right beside him, and about 10 feet above the field, in the field that we were in, was about a 100-foot diameter disc that was fully materialized, rotating counterclockwise, just like the lights had been that created this rainstorm, in the field. And I mean, we're not talking miles away or even hundreds of yards away. We're talking a few hundred feet away. So I got out of the vehicle immediately, and I said, oh, my God, they're here. And this was the most beautiful thing, because it was counterclockwise in how it turned, but the lights that were around the edge of it were these multicolored red and white and amber, and they sort of bled into each other. So they were going both directions, left and right, sort of bleeding into each other in the most beautiful formation of lights. And then it came up to sort of a cone on top, and then there was a set of amber lights on the very top of this disc. This was very, very clear, even though at this point it wasn't pouring rain. It was just sort of misty and drizzly and very British weather. And so we got out, and I turned. There was a woman with me who was from the United States, who was a PhD psychologist, and I said, look, we need to signal to this craft and let them know that we see them now and invite them to come closer. And she says, we're going to do what? And I said, well, we're going to invite them to come closer for contact. And she refused to get the light. We had those times we didn't have the lasers we use now. We had these big high-powered lights. She says, no, I can't. And it turned out that she was just absolutely terrified. And because I said, well, what do you think we're doing here? And she said, well, I thought maybe we'd see something at some great distance. I didn't expect one to be right here in the field with us, fully materialized. I said, well, that's why we're doing this. We're here to make contact and create an open relationship between humanity and these extraterrestrial civilizations. And she says, oh, no, we can't. And so it was very interesting sort of dynamic, because this had been someone who had been very flip about the idea of making contact before this event happened. And at this time, back in the early 90s, I was not doing trainings for people where I would spend a week with them teaching them meditation techniques and higher states of consciousness and the whole philosophy behind the contact and the techniques. I just thought, well, people go out and do this and everyone would be ready for it. Well, everyone isn't ready for it, no matter what they may say intellectually. There's a sort of a bypass around their intellect, that people will intellectualize these things and won't really check in with if they're really ready for something like this. So I realized that. Now, one of the things in her defense, I will say, is that this object was materialized fully, meaning that it was in linear space-time, three-dimensional. And the craft was close enough that it was causing an electrostatic discharge so that all the hair was standing up on our bodies. In other words, it's sort of an electrostatic field, and the power lines that were on the farm had this buzzing to them, which was a result of this electromagnetic energy field, because these ET spacecraft create enormous gigawatts of electricity. They're not running on fossil fuels or a nuclear power plant. They're running on these transdimensional electromagnetic systems that generate enormous amounts of electrical discharge and alter space-time, and can also have an effect on consciousness because of that, which is another discussion we can get into. Well, then I put my compass out, and the compass was moving counterclockwise around the dial very slowly as the craft was moving counterclockwise. So the magnetic field change was so profound that this compass was literally moving off magnetic north, and but slowly. It wasn't spinning quickly, but slowly rotating around, like this entire magnetic field around us was shifting counterclockwise. So all of this phenomenon was going on, and this one particular person became totally unglued. And at that point, now this craft started coming closer, because I was inviting it to come closer, and it was gliding in the field closer and closer and closer. And as it did so, of course, this phenomenon of electrostatic discharge and the magnetic field changing and the hair standing on end because of the electrostatic field around us was increasing. And this woman became so disturbed that at that point the ETs sensed her fear and stopped. And I always tell people this is how you can tell the difference between a covert human alien reproduction vehicle that have these fake ETs on them that are doing all the abductions and the real ETs. The real ETs never push into your space to where you're afraid that much. And so she became so afraid that she stopped. The craft stopped. And then it slowly backed off and then rose and went into this mist, because it was a very misty night, and looked like it disappeared, but I knew it was up in the clouds above us because my compass continued to go around the dial counterclockwise for an entire hour until it made a complete 360-degree movement. And at that point, exactly at that point, the clouds opened up right above us, and there was an amber-colored disk up in the sky, some few thousand feet away, some safe distance, at least for this woman. They knew that she would be okay with that, and we signaled to it with our lights, and it signaled back, and then it vanished and just disappeared in the sky. It was a beautiful, beautiful encounter, and there were many lessons in this. Number one, they can create an environmental situation like this rainstorm to secure an area, and they have done this. Linda and I have seen this happen many times. Number two, they are sensitive to people being afraid. And if they sense that fear from people, if people aren't really ready for contact, they will keep a certain distance because they don't want to create that kind of psychic violence or trauma. And number three, they can then move into a modality where they can be at some distance where everyone who is on site is comfortable. And number four, that the electromagnetic effects of these craft, when they're fully materialized in our linear space-time, is enormous, enough to move magnetic field to where a compass is moving counterclockwise with the rotation of the ship. So there are a number of things that happen, but these are just a few of the things that happened right away as we went there. So this is something that I really wanted to share as our first expedition to England, and that this is what happened. And there were more things that happened that year, but those are the real highlights of it. And so when you get on the CSETI.org website, you'll see the logo is a equilateral triangle, and that comes from this crop circle that we transmitted in consciousness to the ETs, and that they made that very night, the first night we were out. So, or one of the early nights that we were out there that week. So it was a very, very gratifying and exciting beginning to our expeditions in Europe and United Kingdom.
And if you happen to have the DVD that goes with Dr. Greer's new book, Contact Countdown to Transformation, there are some photos and videos of that crop circle on that DVD as well.
Yeah, actually, these accounts are in the new book that came out about 6 months ago, which is at disclosureproject.org. You can order it, and if you order it there, you get this DVD for free with the book. And it shows this crop circle and also an aerial shot of it, and also sort of me narrating how it happened. Of course, it's a very old video, but it's quite interesting to see. And, of course, many of these events that we're talking about are on this DVD, so you may want to get that along with the book, because it describes all these experiences in great detail.
That's right. It's awesome.
I don't know if, Linda, if you want to share what happened in July of '97 when we went there. Such an amazing event.
Yeah, that was my first.
You saw a big part of that, and
yeah, my very first trip to England was in July of '97, and it was Sherry Adamek's last trip to England, and Dr. Greer and I were there, and approximately a dozen other people. But anyway, we had just been there a couple of days, say, and Dr. Greer and Sherry were tired, and they had decided to go do some laser work. That was when they both had cancer. Dr. Greer had a melanoma removed and was getting another one, and Sherry had cancer at that time as well. So they were in Dr. Greer's room in this big manor house where we were staying, but we hadn't been there that long, and I didn't really have a total idea of whose room was where in this house or anything. But before they retired for that evening, Dr. Greer had told me specifically he had felt something would happen around 10:30 in the evening or shortly thereafter, so we needed to be out doing our field work by 10:30. And the sun doesn't really go down in England till close to 10:30. So we did get out there. I made really sure that we got out there by 10:30, and we were doing our field work in the backyard of this big manor house. And our group was sitting there, and we were kind of all facing actually the same direction. There weren't that many of us, maybe 10, looking at the house. Some of the people had gone to bed early and everything. We were tired, and so there was like a tree. There was a big tree to the left of the house, and from behind this tree flew this white ball, and it was about between a fat softball and a volleyball kind of size, and it arced from behind the tree and we could clearly see it went in the bay window of this house that the tree was directly opposite. After it arced right in and went in that window, and we're like, that went right in the window of the house. And Ron Russell was out there with us, and he said, well, that's Steve's room. And so we were very, very touched by this, because it was a beautiful shining white, light ball of light that went in there, and we felt the emotion from it, and we felt that we felt its sympathy and its love, and we really got that, and we were very touched by it. And this happened, by the way, at 10:34 p.m. I'll never forget that, because the next morning we dashed up to Dr. Greer and Sherry and said, guess what we saw at 10:34? We saw a ball of light fly right in your window, and he can tell the rest.
Well, yeah, and see, it's amazing, because had they not seen it, we would have never shared this story with the world. This was a period of time when there were a number of people on my team that were having electronic warfare systems inducing cancers. And we had, Sherry had cancer, I had cancer. There was a member of Congress that had cancer that was dying who was helping us with getting the Roswell information out. And there were many, many things like this that had happened. Bill Colby, the former CIA director who was trying to help us, was murdered and was found floating down the Potomac River. And it was a very difficult period, and this is recounted in my book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, and also in this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation. So, you can read about this in a lot of detail. But so Sherry was very, very tired, and she and I knew that one of us was going to die, that somehow that one of us wasn't going to make it. And this was a very intense situation. So we were upstairs in my room and in the sitting area of the room, and we were doing some things with meditation and healing and whatnot. And suddenly we saw this beautiful, white, scintillating, sparkling sphere of light fly in the bay window that Linda just told you about, all of them sitting out on the manor house grounds of this fabulous old estate that we had rented, what they had seen. And we didn't know anyone else saw it, but it was exactly at around 10:34, right after 10:30. And I saw it come in the window, and it came in and turned to my right, its left, and went over to this fireplace and hovered, and then it elongated into about a 3 to 4 foot tall extraterrestrial being. And the lights were all on in the room. I mean, it was visible absolutely with the naked eye. And Sherry was looking down. She had some kind of a laser thing she was doing for some treatments. And I said, Sherry, look, we've never been visited. And she looked over, and here is this ET being who was telepathically and mentally radiating gratitude for the work we were doing and a tremendous honoring of the project and a lot of sympathy. It was very emotional. And Sherry and I were just moved and just shaken by this, frankly. It was an incredible encounter with definitely an extraterrestrial, very, very evolved, kind, and loving ET being that had been with us during this work, and is still with us in this work, that came in to the room that night. And we really had sworn that this was so bizarre. Who would believe that this, transdimensional ET would come in a spherical ball of light and then elongate and be there standing by the fireplace inside the house. I mean, this sounds so far-fetched that Sherry and I said that we really were going to keep this story to ourselves until Linda came up to us, and everyone came up to us the next morning and said, oh, my God, you wouldn't believe what we saw. So then, of course, we told them the rest of this story about this, that this was actually an ET. And it's interesting because we're sort of making full circle because this is 1997. And in this past November in 2009, just, 5 months ago, we had a similar area of light, a very similar shaped object, appear out at Joshua Tree National Park with us. It followed us up from this area where we had seen a craft land way out in the Joshua Tree National Park on this high plain way up at about 4,000 feet. And this is, if you go to CSETI.org, you will see a picture of this person that is hovering right outside our circle above the chairs. And it doesn't look that great on the internet, but when you see it on a high-definition screen, it is absolutely a person. But it came in as this energy field, as a sphere and an orb. And in this orb, there's a projection of light, and this ET is just hovering in it. And Raven Nabulsi got that photograph because she intuitively felt it was there and took the picture with no flash or anything, just kept the shutter open for about 30 seconds, I believe, and there it was. Now, the reason that's so important is that it's exactly what you would expect of extraterrestrial civilizations that have to go faster than the speed of light. And I've been talking about this since the early 90s. And it causes people to really scratch their head and go, well, wait, because everyone's expecting everything to always be material and physical. And I said, well, it is physical, but it's transdimensional. It's sort of like your astral body is physical. but it's not material physical. It's etheric or astral or this other kind of energy. And that's how extraterrestrial civilizations cause their spacecraft to drop out of linear space-time, energetically shift into this other dimension, and travel these vast distances. That it's also how often ETs will appear in your house and your backyard, in your lucid dream state when you're traveling in a flying dream, or you can be sitting completely awake like we were in this room with the lights on, and this ET literally flies in the bay window in 1997 in England and then materializes in front of the fireplace. And the picture of this ET at Joshua Tree in November is a perfect example of that. So, 13 years later, 12 and a half years later, this is still happening. And what we find, however, is that in the scientific community and even in the people in the world who study UFOs, everyone is still locked into a linear three-dimensional space-time paradigm, and they don't understand that in this universe, this creation, that there are multiple trans-dimensional levels of energy and forms that range all the way from the pure conscious state of the absolute unbounded field of consciousness to the largest materialized galaxies and everything in between, including these celestial and etheric and astral and thought worlds and et cetera and so on and so on. But that when you're dealing with civilizations that travel faster than the speed of light, their ability to create an energy field around their spacecraft or around their person and dematerialized and then travel in that dematerialized state or be hovering in that dematerialized state and then pop in and out of linear space-time, as it were, enfolding within space-time. That's what we're talking about. It's very, very exciting. And, of course, I describe this in great detail in this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, that has the DVD that shows a lot of this manifestations of the ETs and how they appear very, very quickly. And if you go to CSETI.org, you'll see the picture of this ET at Joshua Tree. But that's what happened in 97, one of many, many things that happened. And I just want to mention, when we're in England this summer, we're going to be going, I don't know if you want to share, Linda, with those of you who are in Europe or England, we'll be doing a lecture and also a training in France. You may want to mention that to people.
Right. The week before we go to England, we're going to be in France and doing a 3-day-long training, kind of a workshop training. And that will be July 10th through 12th in Brittany, France, near Rennes, France. And then the following week, July 16th through 23rd, we're going to be in England. And on the 17th, which is a Saturday afternoon, Dr. Greer is going to be doing a public lecture in a town called Melksham, which is, and this information, by the way, is up on our website, CSETI.org, and it's under events, and the UK lecture information is listed there. But it's Melksham Assembly Hall, and it's in Wiltshire, sort of west of Marlborough, which is a popular location in the crop circle area of Wiltshire. But this will be an afternoon lecture. And
and I'm going to be showing these videos and photographs of these beings, as well as a number of new ones that we've gotten just recently in the last month or so at the Outer Banks of North Carolina, as well as in Florida this winter, and a lot of the videotape, including of more than several craft materializing into space-time and then dematerializing right over the beach at the Outer Banks that happened about a month ago. So we're going to be presenting all of this for people at this presentation, this public talk in England. So those of you who are able to come to that, that's great. And we'll be also presenting this in Rio Rico, Arizona, for a 3-day conference that we're going to be having in October. which is also up on the website, where Colin Andrews and Richard C. Hoagland of NASA and Monuments on Mars fame, and Dr. Ted Loder on the energy projects, and myself will be presenting for those 3 days and 3 nights. So each night we'll go out under the stars with a whole group of people making contact as we did last year. So these are all things that you can find out about on the website, and we'll be doing those in the coming few months. So also, I should say, in a couple of weeks, we're going to be in Colorado. Those of you who want to come for a whole week and do this, we're going to a place in Colorado called Crestone, and it's in the San Luis Valley, which is known as the Mysterious Valley, and it's south of Denver, about 3.5 or 4 hours out in this very remote area of the Rockies, on the west side of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, and we're going to be there going out under the stars. We have a wonderful site on the edge of this huge wildlife refuge that we use, and then we go into the Great Sand Dunes and do an expedition, and up on Blanca Peak as well. And we've had many, many amazing contact events that I'm sure those of you who've read Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, or the new book, Contact, The Countdown to Transformation, are familiar with. So we're going to do a whole week of training there. We'll be teaching people meditation, and we'll be doing a puja up on Blanca Peak for everyone, and doing a meditation training as well as the contact training of how to teach people how to make contact and what the protocols are. So those of you who can come, that's in June, and the dates are the 13th through the 19th.
And it was actually on our Blanca Peak site near Crestone in 2008, and unfortunately it was like about a month before we got our night vision camcorders, but that was the year that the lights, the ETs made the stars in the Big Dipper go out in some kind of pattern. It was clearly a pattern that was interacting with us. It was so amazingly cool, and it turned out it was a CE5 because Todd Goldenbaum, one of the members of our group, had asked the ETs if they could turn off some of the stars in the Big Dipper. And we were all looking at the Big Dipper, and literally there's 7 major stars that make up the Big Dipper that are very, very bright ones. And like one would go off in the corner of the bowl of the dipper, for example, and then we go, look, that one went off, and it would come back on, but yet another one would go off, and then at one point a few of them were off at the same time, and then we'd say, oh look, they're all back on again, and then one would go off.
And yet, even with my night scopes, you couldn't see anything in that area, so there was some invisible energy field that was occluding the stars in a pattern, and it did this for like 23 minutes in some kind of mathematical sequence. I so much wish we had a night scope hooked to a camera. We got it the next month, actually, in August of 2008, but we didn't have it at that time, so the regular cameras couldn't film it because they're just not good enough to film that kind of detail at night. Now we do have it, and that's what you'll see on this DVD that is with the new book. Some amazing images of things that just normally regular cameras miss. But and I think that what people have to understand is that the ETs find a way to communicate in an infinite number of varieties. It can be through the crop circles, it can be through tones that we hear, it can be through doing things like that with stars, it can be with a craft that's fully materialized, signaling to us, it can be with a being that appears in our room, it can be weirdness with the electronics. We talked about we have these electronic detectors that are magnetic field detectors and electromagnetic detectors that we take out that will be out in the middle of an 800,000-acre national park like Joshua Tree, and in the middle of this electromagnetic, no man-made source for this, they'll start going off in a pattern. And if you read the book, this new book, Contact, Countdown to Transformation, there's a whole chapter called the Orion Transmissions, where we had this craft emerge out of Orion, and then we had these detectors going off for several hours that resulted in this sort of signaling that I tried to interpret and as best I could in these transmissions that are in the book. And so there are many, many ways. And, of course, some people who are locked into sort of a linear sort of Hollywood movie sort of view of extraterrestrial existence are often so amazed how much more beautiful and complex it is. And I said, well, of course, because if we're dealing with civilizations that are really traveling from another star system to our star system here at Earth, they can't be using, something like the space shuttle or going at anything less than multiples of the speed of light. But if you go faster than the speed of light, you can't stay in a material linear form. You have to move into another dimension. You have to move into another type of energy form that's what we call transdimensional, that crosses through various dimensions. And that's what we're dealing with. And that's why it's so amazing what we're documenting and seeing, because it's really opening up many people who come on these expeditions with us under the stars with CSETI, the sort of reality of our future, because we really are, in a sense, seeing the human future and the potential of what's happening. And not only in terms of understanding the cosmos, but understanding higher states of consciousness, the ancient Vedas, but also new energy. How do you get energy from these transdimensional fields so that our homes and cars can be run without burning fossil fuels and destroying the Gulf of Mexico because one greedy oil company, BP, wants to negligently pull oil out of a 5,000-foot well at the bottom of the ocean. And I think that, it's all part of an issue, and this is what people don't realize. And we're not going to solve the problem of the current situation on Earth or even understand how the ETs get here and why they're here until we have an understanding of this transdimensional cosmology. And there's a whole section of these books that I've written that deal with this whole new cosmology and understanding the nexus where consciousness, transdimensional energy fields in linear space-time, and anti-gravity and new energy all come together. And that sort of unified field, if you will, that's transdimensional is really what we have to begin to understand if we're going to understand the ETs that are here, but also understand the human future, how we live on this planet going into the future with anything resembling technology without destroying the planet itself. And so I think that this is why this issue is so relevant. It's relevant because the ETs are here and are waiting for us to respond peacefully to them, which so far no government has done, and that's why CSETI is doing it. When I tell people that, if you come to France for this 3-night, 3-day training, you're going to be taught to be an ambassador from your country or your area to these civilizations. And the reason we're doing this as a citizens diplomacy effort is because the UN and the State Department and the foreign ministries around the world do not have a project dealing with this because this subject has been kept so secret. And we think it's very important that people lead the way in creating this kind of a peaceful approach to these interstellar civilizations. And if we don't do it, who's going to? Hillary Clinton? No, they're not. And so, not yet. So I think we have to lead the way and sort of create that. The other thing that happens is that when a group of people are out under the stars together in these higher states of consciousness and inviting contact within this paradigm of universal peace, without prejudice, without fear, trained properly in understanding cosmology, transdimensional sciences, higher states of consciousness, the puja and what it means, and the Vedic knowledge, what happens is that the ETs always appear in one way or another. We have never not had them appear. Never. They've always appeared. And so somehow, and what's interesting is that what they're saying to us by doing that is that they're very eager to have this kind of link with humanity within this paradigm of universal peace. And that's why we do this without any picking and choosing amongst different ET groups. We don't say, well, we want the ones that look like white, Nordic, Anglo-Saxon people. Any extraterrestrial civilization that can come to Earth, we welcome contact with, without prejudice and without fear, because the purpose is to create universal peace, not to go from global conflict to interplanetary war, which is what the secret government wants us to believe. So I think that it's very important that we be sort of this trailblazing group, and by modeling it, what's interesting, if you study the whole idea of morphogenic fields and Rupert Sheldrake's work, And the whole concepts that Larry Dossey talked about, another fellow physician who talks about non-locality of consciousness, is that when a group of people start doing something, it affects not just the local area, it affects remote areas because of the effect of consciousness. And conscious mind is a non-local, omnipresent field. It's omnipresent and infinite, and it crosses space and time, transcends space and time. And yet it's present at every point in space and time in its fullness, which means that when a group is doing this, it's having an effect on every person on the planet as well as other planets. And so we do a meditation, actually, when we're all together, when you have 30, 40 people doing a deep meditation, where we actually see the future as this peaceful, universal time where humans have become peaceful and are traveling amongst the stars together in peace, but also where the people on Earth are living in a way that's wise, with very advanced sciences and knowledge that are used for peaceful purposes, not weapon systems, but for peace, so that we eliminate poverty and eliminate environmental destruction, because these sciences and technologies are already on this planet. We already have them in classified projects, but we're going to have to figure out a way to bring them out and to use them peacefully. And so all of this is part of a project, and this is why we have the 3 projects. CSETI, which is the Universal Diplomatic Training Program, Disclosure Project to disclose the top-secret witnesses and documents and information that prove that these projects are real and are going on within classified programs. And then, of course, the OrionProject.org that's working to identify scientists and technologies to bring forward that would replace the current paradigm of oil and centralized utilities and burning coal and digging up coal and nuclear power, which, by the way, those of you who think nuclear power is an advanced technology, I want to remind you, all a nuclear power plant is a old-fashioned 1800s steam boiler that it heats up water and turns a steam turbine, chug, 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 like an old railroad chugging along. The only difference is that the heat is coming from splitting an atom, which is called fission, and it causes enormous amounts of radioactive waste. And so basically we're creating all this radioactive waste and radiation, which I'm sure is absolutely horrific. And the ETs we know are monitoring this because they're concerned about what we're doing to the genetics of this planet. The total genetic footprint of the planet is really being harmed by all this radiation and chemical pollution. But all you're really doing with a nuclear power plant is heating up water and turning a steam turbine. I mean, it's not any more advanced than that. So, people who think that that's a really advanced physics solution to the energy problem need to have their heads examined. It is not. It's a very crude and very dangerous way of getting energy, particularly compared to the hyperdimensional, if you will, physics that deal with getting energy from the fabric of space-time. So I think that these projects, a lot of people don't understand how they're connected, but they're intimately connected because it has to do with the human future and creating a transformative civilization on this planet that enables us to, number one, live on this planet without destroying it, eliminate poverty and the roots of war and the haves and the have-nots, create a truly sustainable long-term civilization that can be at peace, that can then go amongst the stars in peace. Now, there are very powerful interests that want to be sure that we continue to have warfare. And this is why the whole ET issue has been couched by Hollywood and the big movie makers and studios and people like Stephen Hawking and others who are trying to say, oh, well, there's a threat out there and we can't possibly make contact. And if we do make contact, they're going to come here to Earth and try to mine our resources here and colonize the Earth, which is the most childish and ridiculous anthropocentric projection I've ever heard. Now, imagine this. You're an interstellar civilization capable of interstellar travel faster than the speed of light. You have all these advanced technologies, and you're going to come to an armed camp like Earth with 7 billion people armed to the teeth with tens of thousands of nuclear weapons aimed at each other? I don't think so. I mean, when there are worlds out there that are just like Earth was a few 100 million years ago, with life and minerals and forests and whatever there is, that would have no civilization on them at all. Why would you come to Earth? So there's this ridiculous sort of paranoid view that people like Stephen Hawking and the people at Lockheed Martin, there are a couple scientists who recently wrote a book in the last few years about, how there's going to be a threat from outer space. And the reality is that we're the problem, and we're the threat, and we're the ones that need to get on another sort of transformative page here in a direction that we have not been doing for the last 100 years that we should have been, and that is creating a peaceful world, bringing out these hidden sciences and technologies, and going out into space peacefully. And what we're going to find, what CSETI has found, I mean, if you come on these expeditions, you'll see that when people are on the same page about approaching this with a new mind, a new consciousness, the ETs appear even when we're being harassed with jet fighters flying overhead and helicopters and police that will try, soldiers that will drive in up on the site with their lights off and try to sort of intimidate what we're doing. And this has all happened in England. I mean, Linda, you can tell them what happened a few times when we had some. Remember that time that huge craft that looked like a giant sun appeared?
Oh yeah,
Why don't you tell that story? It's a great example of what happens.
Oh, that was just amazing. And we were up on, before we even got to Woodborough Hill, we saw it one night on Woodborough Hill, the very first night we were in England in, I think it was 98. Yeah, it was 98. It was the very first night we were out in the Vale of Pewsey, and over this ridge rose this. It looked like it was way bigger than like a setting sun, but it bobbed up over the ridge, which, by the way, was not in the west where the sun would set anyway, but it bobbed. It was already dark. It bobbed up and went down and up and down again. And within 30 seconds, there were jets and helicopters flying over in the area to suppress this giant craft that had shown itself to us. And then it was just a couple nights later, we were up on top of Woodborough Hill again, and we had just gotten up there, in fact, and in a different direction, over a different ridge, this same craft, only it appeared even larger this time, and it was the orangey color of a setting sun, but it was the size of maybe a 50-cent piece held at arm's length, popped up over another ridge, down, then up again, and then dissolved in midair. And again, within 30 seconds, there were jets, there were helicopters, and literally they even dropped flares, so later on they could say it was just us having, exercises dropping flares.
Yes, and a number of people saw this, including some people who had hiked up on Woodborough Hill, weren't part of our team,
right,
who saw it, and they were going, "Oh my God, did you see that?" I said, "Yes, we see this sort of thing a lot." And it was a massive craft. What's interesting, though, is that, obviously there are space reconnaissance and ground-based reconnaissance programs that detect these ET objects when they appear. And there has been this sort of suppression activity, but it doesn't really stop anything. Because if you go into a deeper level of the cosmology, you understand the transdimensional aspects. And that's where you can have an event happen like that did with this being that came in the bay window in England, or that appeared at Joshua Tree in November, this past November, where it's beyond linear space-time and yet can be seen and imaged by our cameras and often seen with the naked eye, but it's beyond a physical system to suppress it. And I think that this is what's interesting, is that eventually, when we get to a point where these classified military programs are under the control of the president or under the control of the prime minister of England, which right now they're not, by the way, we would be able to do this with greater freedom. Unfortunately, there is a sort of a secret government program that isn't under the control of the chain of command, and we've been able to prove this. It certainly is not something that the president controls, that have assets that are designed to detect these objects and also suppress contact. But it doesn't happen in a fail-safe way for them. They don't have total control, because the extraterrestrial civilizations are so much more evolved than that. And however, for us to appreciate that, we have to evolve. We have to evolve to an understanding of the full spectrum of reality that goes from the ancient Vedic concepts that all this is that all of everything that exists is actually consciousness resonating and phasing at whatever frequency, even if it's a star or a plant or a tree or what have you, that everything is awake. And that within that understanding, you have multiple levels of transdimensional reality that interstellar civilizations that dematerialize and rematerialize are in full control of and in touch with. And it's very powerful. And once you understand that, then you can understand how contact can proceed even in the current state of the world, which is admittedly highly dysfunctional. So I think that's, the reality of it, and that's what we teach people how to do. And I think that it's much easier. Once people learn this, they can then go back to their local communities. And obviously, we're sort of a lightning rod that sits up very high, that's very prominent in this field. But people who are doing this on their own, they're able to do this with much less surveillance than, say, an announced event like what we do. But the training events are very important because it brings people together from all over the world. It's exciting. This event we're going to be doing in France on July 10th, 11th, and 12th. We've been given the use of a 2,000-acre ancient estate that predates the formation of the French Republic, actually. And the family that owns it were actually involved in the forming of the French Republic. And they're so excited about hosting us there on this ancient estate where there has been contact. Both the owners of the estate and their mother once were having dinner, and a craft appeared right outside the house, this huge chateau. And they actually took a picture of it, which we'll share with people at this training. And then at another time, there's a sort of a pond in front of this huge chateau, and one of the groundskeepers was coming in, and they saw this quasi-materialized ET craft. It wasn't very big, that appeared right over this lake that's in front of the house. And so this is an area that's had contact, and it's going to be very interesting to go to this area and do the CSETI protocols with a group of people we're training. So I hope those of you who can make it to France, it'll be a wonderful experience. And it's in Brittany, which is, of course, southwest of Paris, and we're going to be about half an hour from the city of Rennes in France, and it'll be a very exciting expedition for those of you who can make that. And again, those of you who have time and can take a week to come to Colorado next month in June, from the 13th to the 19th, we're going to be doing an expedition there as well.
We've got about 3 more minutes, and I want to fit one more last thing in having to do with this triangle theme that we started with, the CSETI crop circle.
Oh,
that circle was very meaningful to Colin Andrews. He told us in his talk last October at Rio Rico, which, by the way, he will be there again relating more of his crop circle information, and he'll have new information that will be involved in fact, after this year. But the triangular theme, when he was first beginning to research crop circles, I pulled up one of his slides from that talk in Rio Rico so I could get this right. He was having CE5s, which Dr. Greer coined the term for, which is a communication in consciousness with the ETs. You ask them to do something, and they'll often show it to you. And he and his fellow crop circle researchers in those very early days noticed, there would be, crop circles were quite simple then. There would be like a circular one, and then in another field there'd be a different shape, and they'd say, well, wouldn't it be cool if the ETs would do concentric circles or mix this shape with that shape, and the next day they'd find that it had happened. And so he mapped all these crop circles that happened in this very early period and found that they happened in a triangular pattern between 3 cities. And I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, like they would say it in England, but if you think an equilateral triangle, the city at the top was Wantage, Wantage, and then the city in the left point of the triangle was Warminster, and the city in the right was Winchester.
Right.
And these were each of these cities was 41.5 miles apart, making a perfect triangle. And the beginning of all these words was want, win, and war. So that was one of his early communications, in crop circles, and of course he's been doing it ever since.
Right, it's an amazing thing. And this, of course, we have these beeping tones that were recorded in a crop circle by the BBC cameras back in the late 80s that we project out into space as part of our contact protocols, and we'll be, of course, train people in that. And when you actually come to these trainings, you get an entire sort of training kit that has all this information in it. But it's really quite exciting. Well, I'd like to thank Linda for joining me and sharing her accounts, as well as the World Puja Network for hosting us. I hope to see some of you at these upcoming CSETI events, and I appreciate all of your support. And again, thanks to the World Puja Network for letting us have this hour with you every couple of weeks. This is Dr. Stephen Greer, and this has been Conversations with Dr. Greer. Until next time, take care and keep looking up. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.